My name is Ava Mitchell, and for most of my life I believed kindness was a small, private thing, an act that belonged in lunch lines, on rainy sidewalks, and quiet household corners. I had never imagined that a small choice on a random Tuesday could dismantle everything I thought I knew about my past and rebuild the path I would walk forward. It was a Tuesday when I met him. Gray, forgettable, ordinary. I took my lunch break, intending only to grab bread and coffee and return to emails and present tense deadlines. The city smelled faintly of diesel and pastries. Harper's Market hummed politely, a refuge for people buying survival in small increments. He was in front of me in the checkout line. Not a spectacle, not a scene, just a man with a basket containing the kind of food that tells you someone lives alone and without luxury, a loaf of whole wheat, 2 cans of soup, a small carton of milk, and a tin of tea. He wore a well-worn coat and cheap shoes. His hair was thinner than his photograph in the journal of my memory. His shoulders bent with age and the invisible weight of many winters. When his card declined, the world condensed in a way I had seen before on other faces. Humiliation, a flush of embarrassment, the instinct to make this small emergency into something invisible. The cashier tried again. The machine blinked red. The line behind us exhaled impatience like a chorus. Someone muttered. The cash register's bell sounded like judgment. He smiled, a small, apologetic smile at the cashier, as if politeness might fix a bank ledger. He pocketed his wallet with slow hands and began, quietly and embarrassed, to step away. I did the sort of thing I rarely did. I stepped forward and paid. It was an amount less than a movie ticket, less than a single night out. $18.79. I handed my card to the cashier and felt nothing noble, just the small human relief of not letting another person fold into shame. Outside on the sidewalk, the man touched my sleeve and said, "You didn't have to do that, dear." "I know," I said, "but I wanted to." He looked at me for a long time, slow, measured, as if labeling my face in a ledger. Then he reached into his coat, produced a small square of paper, and slipped it into my palm. His fingers trembled. "Read it when you're home," he said. "Please." He walked away with the slow, careful steps of someone who hands themselves over to routine grief. I watched until he turned a corner and melted into anonymous city life. I almost called after him. Instead, I watched the note in my hand like it might evaporate. I opened it in my apartment that evening. The handwriting was precise, old-fashioned looped letters like orchestral notations. The first line stunned me into stillness. "Ava, I knew your mother." My breath snagged out. My mother had been gone for 15 years. When she died, small parts of my childhood had been burned down like offerings, her books, the quilts she sewed, photographs that were never properly labeled. I had lived with grief that felt domesticated and dry, like dust on a lamp. I did not expect to find a note with her name on it. The note unfolded into a story. He wrote that her name had been Helena, that she worked in a clinic while I was small, and that when I was born there had been complications, serious complications. A congenital heart condition, he said bluntly, that the local hospital refused to treat free patients for without full payment. My mother had cried and fought and made phone calls. She'd sat on cold benches and petitioned, only to be told that their charity had limits. The man's handwriting told me he had been homeless at the time. A person called by the city many names I had listened to and then tuned out. He wrote that he had no money, but that he had something else, an inheritance of a kind, the house his father left him, a small property in a town 2 hours away. He sold it, he wrote, quietly, painfully, so my mother could pay for my surgery. He wrote that my mother had made him promise never to tell me because she did not want me to feel indebted to strangers. She wanted me to grow with dignity, the letter continued. She made me promise, the man wrote, that you must never know. He said her name like a prayer and then filled in detail after detail, dates, hospital names. Even a photograph he had kept folded in a pocket for 2 decades, the photograph of a woman holding a newborn, eyes tired and fierce. On the back, in faint, urgent pen strokes, she had written, "For Eva, one day." I read the note until the ink blurred. Words changed into things: a surgery in a sterile room, a man selling a house, a mother lying awake with gratitude and fear, a little girl who never knew the size of what was spent on her heartbeat. The old man signed it, Arthur. He said he'd watched me from afar for years, a guardian without a face. He said in the last trembling lines that he was dying now, and that when his card declined, it was not the sum of money he lacked so much as the time he had left. He wanted, before he left, to see me one last time and to deliver this truth. There are moments after shock where the world feels vibrantly thin, like a membrane stretched across a drum. I remembered every episode of dizziness I had as a child, the nurse's band-aids, the solemn voices of adults. I remembered my mother's quietness when I asked about the bills, her way of folding reassurance like a shirt and slipping it into the drawer. The story he told stitched those ragged memories into a tapestry I had never been allowed to inspect. The next morning I went back to Harper's Market. The cashier recognized me. At first she smiled the automatic, helpful smile of someone used to returning customers. Then her face folded. "You mean Arthur?" she asked. "He was here Tuesday." Her voice cracked. "He passed 2 days later." I had expected this some way for the story to continue with him alive, to talk, to shake more hands. But the universe is often less generous than we expect. I obtained his records from the facility where he had lived, a small, cheap room with a kitchen and a radio and 2 plants by the window. They told me he had no family listed. No contacts. Just a life that had been quietly patched together each week by a few small routines. They let me go through his few possessions. A box fit for 1 suitcase held the photograph, the wallet, a pocket watch, a rosary, and a folded letter addressed to me. The photograph was the same one he had slipped into the note. And on the back, faint and careful, my mother's handwriting said, "For Eva, when she is ready." My knees went weak. I held the paper to my chest and cried for reasons I had no words for, because gratitude can be a physical thing like hunger. Because revelation can feel like a debt forgiven. Because sometimes the lives of strangers perform the most consequential acts of love. After the funeral, I organized one with the help of the facility. I sat in my small living room surrounded by Lily and the silence his leaving made. The knowledge that someone had purchased the thing that kept my heart beating was heavy and light all at once. It changed my narrative, not only who I was, but what life might require of me now. How do you reconcile being saved by someone you never met? How do you honor someone who refused recognition for the sake of your freedom? I started with small acts. I donated to the clinic my mother had worked at. I paid a visit to the neighborhood library where I had once sat with my mother reading, and I asked how to support legacy programs for underprivileged children with health crises. I found out that the clinic scrapped by on grants. The administration remembered my mother's name, and remembering was a kind of prayer. I gave money in hours. I became a small, steady presence. A person who could light the morning room with coffee and conversation, but who also knew how to keep paper clipped in the right stacks. People asked why I was so changed by this man. I told them about the note. They asked to see it. I held it like a relic, private, sacred. The letter was not about money. It was about a decision, a life given up to buy someone else's breath. Arthur had sold his house not for glory, but because he knew a life with another beating heart was worth it. That kind of love is not an event. It is a pattern, and once you perceive that pattern, you can't unsee it. I also started a practice, small but stubborn. Every single Tuesday, I bought a little stack of groceries and set them aside. I donated them anonymously to a shelter. I contacted the municipal office and helped create a fund in Arthur's name for urgent pediatric care. I spoke at community events about the systems that force quiet mercies, health departments that balk at expense, insurance policies that reject human worth in numbers, and the practical kindnesses that people perform because the world is not generous enough. 1 month after Arthur's death, I received a letter from a woman at the clinic. She'd been a nurse when my surgery happened. "Julian," she wrote, "Helena was everything. I remember her fighting for you with a fierceness I have rarely seen. She told us not to tell you because she hated the idea of you living a life indebted to pity. We honored that. But the truth is, Eva, your life was stitched together by strangers who believed in you." I placed that letter on my mantle. It felt like a confirmation, like the final bead put on a rosary. It also felt like the beginning of an ethical life I had to live, one with accountability, not silence. There are consequences to such knowledge. I called my father. I had been estranged for years. Grief had not softened him as much as it had hardened the geometry of my life. I told him about Arthur and the photo and the letter. He listened with a kind of disbelief that translated into apology, and then into silence. Not everyone wants to be saved by strangers. Not everyone can forgive themselves for the way they once failed. But I carried this story onward anyway, because the tale's gravity was not mine alone. Months later, on a rainy afternoon when the city had pretended to close its windows against the weather, I opened a small envelope in the mail. It was from a woman called Maribel who had once been Arthur's neighbor. She wrote that after the funeral she had come across a ledger in his desk, small entries that documented every month he had contributed $10 to a fund for sick children. $10. She told me Arthur had done what he could in the margins of his own life, saving for strangers as a private ritual. She enclosed another photograph, this one of his father's house before it was sold, its paint bright and its porch full of light. She wrote, Arthur used to sit on the steps and say the world was supposed to be gentler. Sometimes life's largest acts come in small currency. A house sold, a hospital bill paid, a lifetime of watching from the dark, a note given like a benediction. I kept Arthur's photograph on my kitchen counter. I learned to greet people in the grocery line with more patience. I taught myself to carry kindness like a ledger, small deposits. Repeat it until the account is rich with habit, not with performance. If you ask me now what changed, I would say this: that day in the grocery store altered my moral scale. The world had shifted in ways I could not unlearn. I used to think that the people who saved us were family related by blood or by the social accident of proximity, but Arthur taught me otherwise. He taught me that sometimes a stranger with an ordinary heart and quiet courage will perform a miracle without the need for witnesses. On my mother's birthday that year, I stood at the clinic that had once been her battleground and spoke about gratitude and the secret beneficiaries of charity. I read Arthur's letter aloud because silence was not what he or my mother had wanted for me. I looked at a room of people, doctors, nurses, volunteers, and felt the thread of human obligations sew us together. Arthur's note did not only change my view of the past, it changed the vector of my life. I became the sort of person who notices hands that tremble, who flips a card to help another human being, not for applause, but because one human's breath matters. The last line of his note said simply, "You are your mother's daughter." I am still learning how to honor that phrase. I'm discovering every day what it means to live as though someone traded away a piece of their life for me. Sometimes the world repays the generosity of strangers by asking very little in return. Hold a cart for someone, pay for the groceries. Smile when a face is tired. Sometimes it asks for more time, commitment, activism. I try to respond in all the ways the world requests. Because memory without action is sorrow that grows heavy and still. Because gratitude without circulation is a thing that gilds the heart, but does not feed the hungry. If you ever find a declined card in your path, don't look away. It might be the universe asking you to notice. And if you pick up a note from a pocket and read a secret that rewrites your childhood, let the knowledge alter the arc of your life. Let it push you to do what Arthur did, not as martyrdom, not as spectacle, but as habit. There is a quiet, stubborn revolution in routine kindness. I learned that the week Arthur died. I learned it every Tuesday since. I still buy a little more than I need when I go to Harper's Market. I hand the cashier money for someone else sometimes. I volunteer. I write checks. I make calls. I tell the story when it matters. And sometimes, in quiet moments, I take out the photograph of my mother holding me as a newborn and the note Arthur left. And I read it again, feeling like a citizen of a larger, gentler world, one where strangers are capable of saving lives, and where gratitude can be the work that keeps us all breathing.